Quantum mechanics and death. My name is Frans van Dongen and I'd like to tell you something about quantum mechanics, consciousness as a non-local quantum phenomena and death also as a non-local quantum phenomena. But first something Socrates, one of the old Greeks, said. No one knows what death is, and yet one fears death as if one knew. Would that not be the worst evil? Would that not be ignorance of the most reprehensible kind? Imagining to know what it doesn't know? Non-locality, the cornerstone of quantum mechanics, is essential for a description of consciousness. Non-locality, for instance entanglement, is a form of information that surpasses the speed of light. Mainly because non-locality is outside of time, it follows that consciousness is also timeless. On the basis of this timeless character of consciousness, it can be assumed that death is also a non-local quantum phenomenon. In part 1, consciousness is expressed in terms of non-locality. In part 2, an attempt is made to express death in the same terms of non-locality. All that you touch, all that you see, all that you taste, all you feel. That's how Pink Floyd expressed it. So how about consciousness? There are a number of theories about consciousness. Mention should be made of the theory of Donald Hoffman, in which consciousness is fundamental and the rest of reality is emergent. Second, there's the Penrose-Hameroff model, which explains consciousness as fluctuations in the microtubules in your nerve cells, which should be quantum and because of that non-local. Third, there's the IIT, Integrated Information Theory by Tononi. This theory stresses the informational character of consciousness. Fourth, the Crick and Koch model. In this approach, the functions of the neurons are central. Fifth, there's the Sarfati-Bohm model, in which consciousness is described as the pilot wave, the implicate order. This theory is based on Bohmian quantum mechanics. In this approach, there's also information going from consciousness to the non-local quantum field. Sarfati calls this back reaction. What is common in at least 3 out of the 5 mentioned theory is this non-local quantum character. But because of the latter, it is also timeless. The so-called delayed double split experiment by John Wheeler is experimental proof of the timelessness of non-locality. What you are aware of is local and time-bound. Everything you are aware of, all qualia, are local and time-bound. But the fact that you touch, see, taste and feel is not local but quantum. What you are aware of, the world, is classical, but consciousness is quantum. There are, as it were, 2 realities. The classical Newtonian reality, in which everything has a clearly defined place and time, and the quantum reality, in which things are in multiple places, superposition, and also outside of time. Consciousness is part of the last. This quantum world, with its non-locality and its timelessness, is the original and natural environment of consciousness before your birth and after your death. Consciousness is like the broadcast and the central nervous system is like the radio. Though a radio broadcast has the speed of light, while non-locality is infinitely fast. About the brain, one could say, the brain is a system that exchanges information between the classical local world and the non-local quantum consciousness field. About memories and entanglement. Entanglement, typical for non-locality, could explain the phenomena of memories. A memory is a striking fact that consciousness, despite the fact that it is in the now, gets an experience from the past. How can consciousness experience images, qualia, from the past? How can consciousness retrieve information from the past? It might very well be that the timeless character of consciousness remembers something by means of entanglement. In other words, memory is entanglement, and can therefore and thereby transcend time. Neurologists distinguish between short and long memory. It would be conceivable that the long memory is non-local and the short memory is local. That would also explain why Alzheimer patients have a bad memory for things that are recent and a good memory for things from a long time ago, for example their childhood. Conclusion. Information that consciousness consists of is non-local, easily passes the speed of light and is therefore not relativistic but quantum. Starting from the principle of complementarity by Niels Bohr and the wave collapse, it comes down to the fact that consciousness, through observation, compresses time into one moment and reduces non-local quantum reality, superposition, to one place. A definition of consciousness could be the thing in which the universe takes place. Okay, but how about death? Death is a non-local quantum phenomenon. Johnny the Self-Kicker, a well-known Dutch poet, once said, "Dead, nothing you can do about it." What happens if the microtubules disintegrate for the dead simple reason that the organism in question has come to the end of its life? This is highly dependent on whether you approach this classical or quantum. Starting from the classical, local and temporal world, the information exchange between the central nervous system and the surrounding world simply stops. There's no longer any exchange of information and there's therefore no more consciousness. End of exercise. But if we see consciousness as a quantum phenomenon, it becomes a completely different story. Throughout the life of an organism, particles or waves which are entangled with each other are produced to a large extent and in great numbers in the microtubules. Penrose and Hameroff describe this. Particles that are entangled always remain so, no matter how far they roam apart, and they always remain so. Because of this, after the disintegration of the central nervous system, consciousness still knows the information which is maintained by the entanglement with its non-locality. But how would a conscious agent experience such a thing? What would it like to be dead? What would it like to be placeless and timeless? I'll give you 6 examples. First, dreams. Freud gives all his dreams in his Traumdeutung, his most well-known book, a typical non-local character. It is indeed noticeable in dreams that when you are somewhere in your dream and you think of another place, you are immediately there. Symptoms of Alzheimer's disease are probably also an example of non-locality. The patients in question can remember little of the now, but things that took place when they were small children are clear in their minds. In severe dementia patients, the here and the now hardly mean anything. They are completely absorbed in their past. But it is not the case that these patients do not experience anything. On the contrary, they experience their past so intensively that they no longer have time nor opportunity for the present and the place where they are in our eyes. The near-death experiences, documented in an excellent way by Pim van Lommel, also give a good picture. In many of the examples he gives in his book, there is pronounced non-locality. For example, all memories are overlooked at once. In his book, Van Lommel spends more than 1 chapter on non-locality and quantum mechanics. He makes the following remark. The idea from quantum physicists that consciousness determines whether and how we will experience reality is very important to me. Psychedelics. Agents such as LSD, DMT are also reported to have an influence that seems to blur the line between classical and quantum reality. When users report on their experiences, it usually comes down to typical non-locality. Interesting is that brain research on people that took these psychedelics showed that the brain activity in general was inhibited to a relatively great extent. Memories. They look a bit like dreams. In a memory, your consciousness goes back to an earlier time and another place. In his masterpiece, Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche expresses it beautifully. Rather as a divinely scattered and self-absorbed man, in whose ears the clock has just sounded its 12 beats of noon with all its might, suddenly wakes up and wonders, what time did it actually strike there? In general, death can be described as no longer being bound by the almost all-encompassing limitations of the here and now. Socrates' Cave by Plato. Consciousness no longer experiences one moment at a time, but all moments at the same time. Consciousness comes to be perpendicular to time, as it were. The distinction between past and future is lost. One could say a parallel experience of time instead of a serial. This quantum world with its non-locality and its timelessness is the original and natural environment of consciousness. So probably consciousness was in this phase before birth and will be after death. The current unnatural situation with its locality and overriding difference between past and future is literally and figuratively temporary. The temporary itself is temporary. Timelessness is also known from the theory of relativity. The theory states that nature has no preference for the now which we experience at any given time. All these moments, the past and the future, form one block, the so-called block universe, without a preference for any moment. Einstein is known to have said that the now is a persistent illusion. He said that to comfort the widow of a good friend of his who had just died. Now my last remark. This whole story is not religion, nor is it reductionism. It is a hypothesis based on theoretical physics and on quantum mechanics in particular, no more and no less. But because it is based on a scientific theory, it is more likely and plausible than the explanation we get from religions. Here are the books that I base the whole story on. Thank you for listening and reading. Goodbye.